It is my pleasure to invite you to our second part of our conference entitled Wartime Diplomacy, How Governments Responded to the Holocaust, moderated by Dr. Jakub Kumoch, a political analyst, co-author and editor of the Ładoś list, as well as author of other publications on the activities of the Ładoś Group. In the years 2016-2020, he was the ambassador of the Republic of Poland to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and currently serves as the Polish ambassador to Turkey. With great pleasure, I now give the floor to Dr. Kumoch.
Thank you, Marek, very much, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. First of all, I would like to welcome our viewers or listeners in first Holocaust survivors and their descendants. Thank you very much for being with us. It's a very important fact. I can see also people involved into the research in the area of diplomatic rescue. I can see, among others, Dr. Agnieszka Haska, whom I would like to welcome very warmly. Dr. Haska is the author of one of the first articles about Alexander Ładoś, about the diplomatic rescue, written in the Polish language. Please be our guest tonight and feel free to participate in the debate. I can see also, sorry, I cannot unfortunately see everybody. I can see among others Professor Antoni Polonski and Jacek Papis, whose two movies largely contributed to our today's knowledge. But first of all, let me introduce our panelists. Well, I don't even know if Dr. Mordecai Paldiel, the only Holocaust survivor among the panelists, really needs an introduction. Dr. Paldiel led for a long time Yad Vashem's Department of Writers among the Nations, and as he supervised the recognition of most of Polish writers. Dr. Paldiel is also one of the biggest experts in diplomatic rescue, great promoter of people like Aristides de Souza Mendes and Alexander Ładoś. Dr. John Cornell's expertise is Polish-British intergovernmental relations during the war. His expertise encompasses the world government's reaction on Holocaust, and I'm really looking forward to this part of the panel and assessment from the Western perspective. Were just 32 and 39, so before the Holocaust and before the war. She's one of the very few people possessing this complex question. And lastly, at least, another person who does bring an introduction, Professor Marek, science historian, expert on totalitarian Sovietologist and Soviet relations on the policy of the Second World War. Thank you very much for being with us. Me, it's finally Jakub Kumoch. I'm a diplomat, but I'm also a co-author of the Ładoś list and the Holocaust researcher. I would never say scholar because it's too much for me. Ladies and gentlemen, leading such a panel is a big honor to me, but we have 80 minutes to discuss a complex issue of wartime diplomacy and how governments responded to the Holocaust. I would like to introduce just one single rule. This is not an echo chamber. This is a debate. There is no blasphemy law here. There is no place for apologetics or for attacking. There is a debate. There are no taboo questions. I would love that to make so that everybody who asks a question receives a response, an answer. So our panelists are free, and so are our participants. Giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to ask them to stick to 10 minutes so that there is time for full debate. Well, having said that, let me start from Dr. Cornell. Dr. Cornell, the persecution of Jews, which begins in Germany in the 30s, turns into the murder in the history of humanity, mass murder. The words around it still exist, can't exist. or doesn't, how decide from the very beginning the governments to
Hi, thank you very much, Ambassador Kumoch. I'm not sure if it's just me, but your audio is breaking up a bit. Maybe that's just
shall I repeat my question?
Sure, if you would.
So, okay. Just a moment. Dr. Cornell, I was just to ask you about the reaction to persecution of Jews by in Germany and later on in next Austria, and that over the time when this persecution.
Yes, okay. I think I got most of the question. It's still it's breaking up, unfortunately. But so yes, and you've asked me this before. I'm asked to speak about the Allied reactions to the persecution of the Jews by Nazi Germany, particularly amongst the U.S. and Britain. And I think, and I'll try to be as quick as I can with this. It's a difficult subject to discuss, really, because I think, as we all know, really, in the end, tragically little was done by the US or British governments to aid the Jews. In fact, both showed great resistance to undertaking rescue operations, or indeed even to raising public outcry against the persecution. So it's a much sadder story, really, than the others, hopefully, that we'll be hearing today. The Allied governments, of course, long received criticism for this. But what I'd really like to consider here briefly is why they did so little and what it was perhaps that stopped them from doing more. After all, the ideals were there. In his 1941 State of the Union speech, Roosevelt spoke famously of the four freedoms, which were to be enjoyed by peoples the world over, and which included freedom from want and freedom from fear. And these were clearly intended by Roosevelt to inspire a sense of duty amongst American citizens towards persecuted peoples worldwide. And there were certainly many within the Allied governments, British and American, who were strongly affected by the plight of the Jews and who felt morally impelled to do something. But of course, unfortunately, there were many others who were largely indifferent and some who were quite outspokenly anti-Semitic. So within the governments, there were sharp divisions, really, not just about how to help, but over how seriously they were to take the crisis in the first place, or how obligated they should feel to react. Moreover, the divisions within the governments merely reflected the sharp divisions within the societies themselves in Britain and America. In fact, there was great resistance among the Allied nations' own peoples to engaging in war against Germany at all. And it was really only undertaken as a response to an existential threat. So to most people, it was really a war against something, against our enemies, against Nazism, against fascism, more than it was a war for something, for world democracy, for an end to persecution, much less for the rescue of Jews. There was therefore then a very limited and narrow consensus amongst the British and American publics as to what it was they were in fact willing to fight for. And it was a consensus that was shaped more by domestic concerns and attitudes than by any global ideals. So to a great degree, whatever will there may have been within the Allied governments to take action on behalf of the persecuted peoples of Europe, especially the Jews, this was continually being undercut by the calculation that fragile support for the war effort could be lost at any moment if the aims of the war were seen by the public as going beyond this very narrow social consensus. Now, if we take a look at the reactions to the early Nazi persecutions in Germany and Austria in the 1930s and in the early part of the war, and to the ensuing waves of refugees, we can see how these were very much, these reactions were very much conditioned by this kind of calculation regarding these domestic concerns and attitudes. And of course, chief amongst these in the United States were widespread currents of isolationism, xenophobia, and nativism following World War I, which found expression in strong anti-immigration sentiments. There were quota systems set up in the 1920s to keep immigration at a minimum. These were then, of course, strengthened by the Depression, with the fear of waves of refugees taking precious jobs away. And even during the wartime, when there was relative prosperity from the New Deal and from the wartime economy, there was still great fear that the end of the war would bring another depression and returning vets would be scrambling for scarce jobs. And so this too kept quotas drastically low. In fact, during the entire period of the war, only 21,000 immigrants or so were allowed into the country, which was in fact a much lower number than the quotas themselves. There were, of course, similar concerns for jobs, which also encouraged strong anti-immigration sentiments in Britain. And then these anti-immigration sentiments were further exacerbated by the widespread anti-Semitism, which unfortunately we have to admit was quite present in Britain and America, and indeed all over the world. Polls, in fact, that were done shortly before the war in 1940 or so, showed that roughly half Americans had anti-Semitic views, regarded Jews with deep mistrust and suspicion. Anti-Semitism was also widespread in Britain, and the British also had deep fears about anti-Semitism in the Arab nations in the Middle East, and so were always constantly determined not to allow Jewish refugees into Palestine. So underlying the American and British government's reactions to the plight of the Jews in Germany and Austria, and later in the occupied countries, and to the waves of the refugees, was this great fear of stirring up both a fierce opposition to immigration and further sparking an anti-Semitic backlash which would undercut the war effort. And as a result, their response was to hold fast to strict policies of absolute refusal to lift immigration restrictions, no matter what the circumstances, throughout the war. The most striking example of this being, of course, the Bermuda Conference in April of 1943. Now, if we look to reactions to the news of the mass murders and the extermination of the Jews, which was pouring in 1942 and after, we can see that these reactions too were determined by these same concerns, the same fear of arousing an anti-immigration and anti-Semitic opposition among their own peoples and losing support thereby for the war effort. The Allies, of course, did have ample evidence of the German atrocities being carried out in the occupied countries, including persecution of the Jews, the establishment of the ghettos and the conditions within them, and eventually of the final solution or the ultimate plans of the Nazis. Much of this was, of course, thanks to the Polish underground and exile government, as I hope we will hear more. So, in other words, by July of 1942, really at the kind of height of the Holocaust, or the beginning of the most murderous period, they had ample information regarding the goal of the final solution of the complete extermination of the Jewish peoples of Europe, of the mass shootings in the East. They knew of the number of at least 700,000 who had been murdered there, and of the Helmo gas vans as well. Both the British and American governments acted to minimize the impact of this information. There was a tendency to disbelieve the evidence or to doubt its accuracy, and there was an unwillingness to make public the news of the atrocities or of the plan for extermination. As Michael Fleming has argued, the British maintained an informal censorship regime, not only of their own press and radio, but of the exile governments as well, and leaned heavily on them to tone down their public reports on atrocities. Similarly, advisors to the United States military would state that the United States should avoid, quote, vehement or sentimental defense of Jews, unquote, in its broadcasts to Europe. The reasons that were often given for this was that it was for the Jews' own good, that they should not expose them to more attention from the Germans. But most often, it was argued that stories of atrocities against Jews showing concern and solicitude would simply spark an anti-Semitic backlash within their own countries. I would suggest, moreover, that to publicize the atrocities with more urgency might very well have led to concerned citizens demanding more action. And this, of course, would have put both governments in an awkward position, given their strict immigration policies. So we see here the same exasperating logic at work, that to take the news of the mass extermination of the Jews and of the final solution to heart, and to show outrage and determination in the face of it, would only be to stir up these underlying currents of xenophobia, anti-immigrationism, and anti-Semitism. And the American and British publics would then lose faith in the war effort. Now, my final point, just very quickly, is that the position that the British and American governments fell back on as a result was that the only way to help the Jews and others suffering in the occupation was simply to win the war. And this then became another, even more effective means of stonewalling demands for action in response to atrocities. It was often given as the reason for refusing to commit military resources to rescue operations. Particularly frustrating example of which is the refusal to bomb Auschwitz, arguing that they simply could not divert resources from military objectives, even though they were bombing the factories 5 miles away. So just quickly in conclusion, I would say that there was perhaps a certain logic to this position, and it was certainly the easiest to sell to a public that was eager to see an end to their own sacrifices. But of course, in making the only goal the total military defeat of the enemy, the Allied governments precluded any really large-scale diplomatic solutions to the crisis of the Holocaust on a high governmental level, and essentially postponed any real consideration of the crisis of the Jews to the ending of the war, to liberation. And of course, tragically, we all know the results of that. So in the end, I think the task of aiding and rescuing Europe's Jews was largely left up to the efforts of individuals and small groups, as we will hear much more about, who were outside of the central orbit of the major Allied governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this concise presentation, and unfortunately with very sad conclusions. In fact, I've been studying cables of Polish diplomacy since 1939, and the problem which appears very often in 1940-41 is that many European capitals are full of Polish migrants, their majority Jews, and no one wants them. I mean, no country from outside Europe instead is ready to accept a larger number of Jewish migrants. Of course, they don't know what is going to happen with them, but still they know that the persecution is there. Well, this is probably the best moment to turn to Dr. Paldiel. When we met for the first time, I was really struck by your focus on individual people and the non-ethnic approach towards the question of Holocaust, responsibility for Holocaust, and also credit for rescue. Diplomacy is not only governments, diplomacy is also people. And well, in your position of kind of Yad Vashem's Department of the Righteous, you have participated in recognizing a lot of diplomats. My question goes like that. Who were they really? Who were the individual righteous diplomats? Why they did what they did? Were they representative for the diplomacy of the time, or just represented a tiny minority? Are they somehow similar to each other, or maybe you would make an attempt to offer us a categorization of different attitudes of righteous diplomat? Dr. Paldiel, anyway, the floor is yours. Please unmute.
Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes? Okay, so let me start by saying we are talking about individual persons. We're not talking about governments here, not specifically governments. We're talking about persons. We're talking about Alexander Ładoś and the people in his legation. Now, I'm not saying that the governments were against or they were for, but the initiative and the responsibility were taken by the individual persons, and I will explain further. We are also talking about helping people to survive with the assistance of a piece of paper, a document, or a stamped visa, or one's passport. That can make a difference between life and death. Like Lados, like others, Angelo Rota, who was the diplomatic nuncio in Budapest, gave out papers claiming that Jews are on the point of becoming Catholics, a piece of paper. And then there were diplomats who claimed that Jews were actually descendants of Spanish Jews, and therefore they should come under the protection of Spain or of Portugal. Wallenberg gave out Schutzpass claiming that these Jews were on their way to going to Sweden, and that was Schutzpass, and so forth and so forth, and Sugihara too. Now, all these visas, passports, and citizenships were based on false and fabricated data. It was not true. These Polish Jews who received Paraguayan passports, they were not Paraguayan citizenship. El Salvador issued citizenship papers to thousands of Jews from its consulate in Geneva. And these Jews have never heard of where El Salvador is located. A Turkish diplomat issued papers claiming that some Jews on the island of Rhodes were Turkish citizens, and most of them were not. Karl Lutz gave out Swiss Schutzpass to people on the premise that they were Swiss or they were going to Switzerland, etc., and they were not. Sugihara and Sloterdijk gave out visas for people that traveled via Japan because they were on their way to Curaçao, and they were not on their way to Curaçao. So these are diplomats who are really in violation of their own mandates and their own regulations. You don't come to a consulate and you're asking for a passport or a visa based on false and fabricated data known to the person who is about to give you the passport, because you're not going to get very far. Now, the third point I want to mention is all these wonderful people, these diplomats, they, as far as I know, did not seek permission outset of their benevolent. They did not ask. Paraguay. Why didn't they do it? Because I think if a very non-clear answer, because, for instance, issuing thousands of Paraguayan passports, Paraguay even knowing that there are thousands of passports, the British government had given permission, and there was to prove that, would have had the trouble with paradigmatic trouble. So it was not to get his government into trouble. It's possible that the government was in favor of that, but it's best not to act so there is no, not to get the government in any possible diplomatic trouble in case this was revealed, as evidently it was revealed. And Paraguay found out about this, and so the other country. So these diplomats, they did not disobey, with the exception of one diplomat, Suso Mendes, who actually disobeyed. He was told not to issue any visas to they misinterpreted, and they went beyond. Again, Wallenberg issued thousands of Schutzpass. He didn't ask the Swedish government whether he could issue thousands. He may have asked, can I issue a few Schutzpass? I am sure although I cannot prove it. If Alexander Wadosh would have asked his government, can I issue thousands of Paraguayan passports? He probably may have told me, you can issue maybe a handful, a dozen, but thousands? This is going to go out of hand. So they went beyond the permissible mandate that they could do because they wanted to save lives. These people realized, and here I want to go into a philosophical thing. We all know that in order to preserve a sound and regulated society, we have to obey the laws of society. Society tells us what is permissible and what is not permissible. And this is how society can go on and function properly. The values of civilization, you have to disobey the laws and regulations in force. And that was at the time during the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, a government had decreed that the Jewish people have no right to exist. That was the law. These were the things that one should obey. And so these realized that there was a law above this law, the universal law, which sustains civilization. And therefore you have either to disobey or to overlook or to misinterpret and even issue passports, which under normal circumstances, we all agree, a man like Alexander Wadosh, under normal circumstances, would not have consent to issue even one Paraguayan passport because society would collapse. But during the Holocaust, in order to preserve the values of civilization, so these people realized that they were acting in accordance with a universal moral law which holds civilizations together. Some of these diplomats were reprimanded and punished. Lutz was reprimanded for issuing thousands of Swiss Schutzpasses. Susan Mendes, we know what happened to him. He was placed on trial, he was fired, and all of his pensions were denied to him. Wallenberg, unfortunately, was punished for the wrong reasons by the Russians. They suspected him to be a spy, and he died, we don't know how, but he died while in Russian captivity. The other diplomats that we honored at Yad Vashem, they were not, sadly, acknowledged by their own governments immediately after the war. Most of them were forgotten, and most of them suffered various discomforts after the war. The Chinese diplomat Ho was not acknowledged by China. Sugihara was not acknowledged by Japan. Susan Mendes, of course, was not only not acknowledged, he was punished. I can go on, even the man that I admire very strongly, Alexander Wadosh. After the war, his government, nobody knew about him. It had to do maybe because Poland had become communist and Wadosh was not, of course, a communist, but he went back to Poland in 1960 and he was completely forgotten. So their own governments, who should have been proud of these people, they should have hailed him while these people were still alive. Because all these people did, they saved lives. And that would have gone to the credit of these governments. But they didn't do it. They waited for many, many, many years. And it's only very recently, thanks to a man like Jakub Kumoch, that we know about Wadosh. 2 years ago, I had never heard of this. And I worked at Yad Vashem for 24 years, and we had many stories of people who helped. But all the stories of the very important people came out very late, after these people were no longer alive. So Susan Mendes today is a hero in Portugal. Unfortunately, he's not alive. He died in poverty. So he's acknowledged now by Portugal many, many years after he has passed away. So this is something which is very sad, and this is something which should give us some thought. I want to add and say, Yad Vashem has certain criteria for honoring people as righteous Gentiles. When it comes to a person who hides a Jew in his home, gives him shelter, and we have many such stories from Poland and other countries, it is sufficient that a person hid one Jew, just one person, and he did that when he knew he was risking his life, which was quite obvious in Poland, because in Poland, no Pole needed to go to a lawyer to find out what would happen to him if he was caught hiding a Jew. All he had to do is step out from his home and look on the bulletin boards, and there it says very clearly that hiding a Jew is punishable by death. So in Poland, any person who hid a Jew and didn't do it for any ultimate reward, and he risked his life, we honored Yad Vashem. So the question is, what about diplomats? Diplomats don't risk their lives. The worst that can happen to them, they can be declared persona non grata and they can be expelled. So when it comes to diplomats, we have a different criteria. The criteria is persons who either disobeyed or misinterpreted the regulations, turned it upside down. And in addition, they helped many persons, not just one, not just two, not just three, but maybe dozens. And in the case of Wadosh, thousands. They would qualify for the title of righteous among the nations. And I hope Yad Vashem eventually this year will come around and add Wadosh to the title of righteous among the nations, because with all due respect to Rokitsky would not have acted alone. He was not the head of the legation in Bern. And if he issued and if he signed, as Heidi testified, if his signature appears on so many passports, he didn't do it while in hiding. He didn't do it while he was closing himself up in the bathroom. He did it, everybody knew, and it was with the authorization of the man who was in charge of the legation, Alexander Wadosh. And there are many other documents which, thanks to Kumoch, proves that Wadosh was involved in so many different aspects of helping Jews, and even Jews who were not even Polish citizens, like Dr. Burg, Pierre Mendes France. They all got Polish passports in order to get them out from a situation of danger. So, but to answer your question about the motivations, these were humanitarians in the best tradition, the best biblical tradition. These are people who showed us how to behave under abnormal circumstances in order to preserve the values of civilized life, and we should be thankful to them.
Well, thank you very much. And well, unfortunately, I must say, I share your point of view about also Poland failing to recognize their righteous diplomats on time. Of course, we may argue that the post-war government was communist, but neither Polish, well, let's say opposition historians did really talk about this aspect of the issue. Of course, I'm not taking credit for a so-called discovering of Alexander Wadosh, because Alexander Wadosh has been discovered a long time ago. Dr. Haska is with us. She also highly contributed to a discovery of this person. On the other hand, thank you very much for stressing that the righteous diplomats were in fact a tiny portion of diplomats, people who, I would say, overdosed their duty, somehow believed that that their duty now is not to blindly follow their government's instructions, but to, as you think that, and yes, if Wadosh said, "May I issue 10,000 passports?" then people would say it's unfeasible. You can't do it. First of all, you can't do it. Secondly, it's very risky, and so on. But the government at the end of the war believed that the issue was several hundred passports and not several thousand passports. This is true. Thank you very much. And I'm now coming to.
I would like to add something. The good people are always a minority, but they show the way. And I want to say something. For Christians, we all have the story of the Good Samaritan told by Jesus. He gave a story. What is the ultimate good moral behavior? So he gave a story about a good Samaritan who helped a Jew, and the Samaritans and the Jews were not getting along fine in those days. And that story of the Good Samaritan, one such story has such an immense impact. Today, in all the churches, they repeat the story of being a Good Samaritan. So
Yes,
one
yes.
individual story can make a big difference.
Yes, it turned the word Samaritan into the meaning somebody very good. Well, Dr. Kornat, a very Polish question after all that, the most Polish question. And what about Poland? Meaning, in all of this, I'm sure you will give us a picture of the special role of Polish diplomacy of a state which was different from others, which was not in control of its own territory after 1939, but at the same time represented also 3 million Jewish citizens. I mean, theoretically, this state was obliged to protect their own citizens. So what is the uniqueness of the Polish diplomacy at the time? Is it really like other allied diplomacies, or it differs? The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kumoch. I would like to start my very brief presentation by two introductory remarks. First of all, I would like to underline this fundamental question which was mentioned by Ambassador Kumoch. I mean, the Polish government in exile and its specific position in the international relations. We must remember that this government had normal international recognition. This was the recognition not only by the allied powers, but also the neutral countries. And it functioned the normal diplomatic service, consular and diplomatic, but this was the government without land. The territory of Poland was occupied, and Poland became the first victim of the two totalitarian powers, I mean German Reich and I mean the Soviet Union in 1939. And we must remember that the influence of Polish exile government on the strategy or policy of the allied governments was very, very limited. It was very limited. I mean, not only France and Britain, which were formally allied during the Second World War, but also on the government of the United States. And second remark, Polish government was generally well informed on the Nazi persecution, mass persecution of Jews in occupied Poland. The underground state in Poland functioned very, very effective. It is the common view of Polish historians, and we must remember also on some kind of particular or unique efforts of Polish soldiers and functionaries of the underground state, like Instytut Pilecki, who was the volunteer to Auschwitz, and he kept the information of fundamental importance for the problem of mass extermination of Jews on the territory of Poland. Generally, in responding on your question, Mr. Ambassador, I can say the Polish Foreign Service had generally two aims or two objectives. First of all, it was the idea of information on the mass extermination, Holocaust, etc., and to send this information to the Western allied governments and to public opinion also, to organize the moral resistance on the German atrocities, Nazi atrocities. This was the first aim, in my opinion, and we can enumerate many actions in this point of view. Let me say about such well-known events like public discourse of the Prime Minister of Polish government in exile, General Sikorski, in Royal Albert Hall in London in October 1942, or some publications in English, publications of documents, publications of informations on the exterminations of Jews and criminal policy on the occupied territories. Especially, I can mention one famous text. I mean the text under the title "Persecution of Jews in German occupied Poland," which was published at the beginning of 1943. The second aim of this action, it was the idea of preparation or starting diplomatic action of Allied governments to make a clear declaration condemning the German atrocities, and it could lead in the future to the discussion on another subject. I mean the problem of trials against the criminals of war. This fundamental action belonged to Polish government. Polish government started this discussion. It is very interesting not to omit this question. And the Polish acting foreign minister in the Polish government in exile and ambassador to London, Edward Raczyński, sent a special note to the Allied governments, which was dated for December 10th, 1942. And it was the first official act taken by one of the Allied governments in connection with the Nazi persecution of Jews and mass extermination in occupied Europe. It is important to highlight that the extermination camps were identified in this note, in this short, very short text. The note enumerates not only the notion of citizens of Poland, but also the people of Polish citizenship, but of Jewish origin. In the end of this note, Raczyński expressed the hope that Germany might be effectively restrained from continuing to apply such methods of mass extermination. These are the last sentences of this text. The most important question, I think, in the publications issued by Polish Ministry of Information and in the public announcement of Polish leaders, it was the idea to enumerate, to develop the problem of the new kinds of crimes against humanity, against civilized world. Such criminal acts require international solidarity and condemnation. This was the view justifying this point of view. We cannot, I think, we cannot forget that Polish diplomatic efforts produced a common declaration of the Allied governments and all Allied governments on exile in London, which was dated for December 17, 1942. Another step of Polish government in this time was the speech of Stanisław Mikołajczyk, who was in the future a successor of General Sikorski as prime minister, but in this day he was the deputy prime minister in Polish government. He made an appeal to the Allied governments to draw attention to mass extermination in the occupied Poland. And he said that the common duty of the Allied governments is to deter the German authorities from pursuing such policy in the future. The next question, which was also mentioned today, but I will be very short in I will try to limit myself to only few sentences. I mean the engagement of the Polish diplomatic service, Polish foreign service in the help of Jews. I mean such actions like the group of Ładoś or action taken by Polish ambassador to Tokyo, Tadeusz Romer, the delegate to Hungary, Henryk Sławik, or the other persons like consul in Istanbul, Wojciech Rychlewicz. These probably such cases are more numerous than we can suspect today. It is a question which requires a special attention of historians, and probably it will be very interesting to prepare a broader study of enumerating such personal actions of Polish diplomats. Of course, Polish government was not unique one in the action to condemn German atrocities. For instance, between Polish government and Czechoslovak government, we cannot see the difference in doctrine, but in tactics, in the real engagement of Polish and Czechoslovak foreign services. Czechoslovak government participated also in the action started by Raczyński's lord. It is true, and there was no difference in common between these two allied governments. However, we must remember that some kind of animosity between Polish and Czechoslovak governments took place in this time. We must remember that Polish government was the government of the country in which the largest group of Jewish people lived before the war. This was probably the reason of the action taken by Polish diplomacy and taken personally by Foreign Minister Raczyński. In response to the question which is highlighted in the title of our session, was Polish diplomacy working against the Holocaust? I have no doubts, yes, but the results were very moderate. In my opinion. There was no, for instance, all informations which were transmitted to Washington or to London by Polish diplomatic service, they were joined with the suggestion of retaliation against Germans. And there was no response, no successive response on it. This is the other side of the medal. This is very interesting, and we must remember also on it. And I will try to conclude in 2 sentences. The first aim was to organize the moral resistance against such violations of the moral law as Germans committed. And second, it was the idea of the future international trials against the criminals of war. And it was taken, this action was taken in the name of humanity and in the name of civilization, to which all the Allied nations belonged. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this very interesting contribution and for these very powerful words at the end of your intervention. This is not about apologetics, this is about reality. Poland, yes, Poland was against, as a state, was against the Holocaust, but was unable to stop it. And I also always said when we spoke about Alexander Ładoś, yes, Alexander Ładoś saved many people, but this was a very tiny part of influential people who could afford this passport, who could well, contributed to saving, to be more scholarly. Well, thank you also that you have reminded me about something I have thought a lot during last time. Yes, the government of Poland, as Menahem Rosenzaft put it, was one of the few allies of Jews, but the word ally does not really mean friend. The word ally means somebody who has common interests. When I reflect about this sentence critically, was it about Jews or was it about Poland? Well, in 1940, for example, Polish diplomats indeed forged a lot of documents to enable Jews escaping from Europe. But did they do it because they were Jew lovers, friends of Jews, or did they do it to deload the refugee crisis, be it in Turkey or in Lisbon? For example, in my research, I found cases of a diplomat who also, yes, forged papers to Jews to send them to Brazil. But his motivation, he explained, was to make more space for, as he said, valuable Polish ethnic element. So, well, anti-Semitic rescuers is also a fact. I mean, they existed, and yeah, I mean, it's better to be an anti-Semite and rescue Jews than not to rescue. This is simple. Well, and thank you very much. And finally, but this is a very important part of our contribution. Before I leave the floor to Kinga Czechowska, I'll tell you just about one single document, with several documents, in fact, I found, but one single really struck me. It was found in Bern. I've never spoken about it. It's about the procedure of stripping a Jewess of a Polish citizenship in 1938. As you know, Polish law before the war permitted to strip any person who had migrated from Poland, stayed abroad, and lost links to the country of citizenship. And the typical reason for it was being abroad and refusing to come back to Poland, being summoned by official authorities, or not speaking Polish. Of course, it did not officially target Jews, but Jews were victims of it. Jews lost citizenship. Excuse me. And I understood that at the very beginning of October 1939, after the change of government, one of the first decisions by Foreign Minister Zaleski was revoking the law. I mean, not revoking the law, but asking the consuls not to apply it. And the same consuls, which stripped Jews of citizenship, would restore thousands of Jewish citizenship after the defeat of September 1939. What actually, I'm referring to Dr. Kinga Czechowska, soon doctor, what actually happened? Were they really to Poland in this period? One who tried to get rid of as much of Jewish citizenship as it could, and the other one which suddenly believed that Jews may be their allies during the war. What happened? You are expert in the Poland's Jewish policy 1932-39. What was the change? Why this policy, this shift of the policy happened? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor, really. And to answer your question, the new legislation from 1938, it was introduced in a very strong connection with the Anschluss of Austria. It was prepared before, but it was the Anschluss that made it possible to move it to Sejm and to put this legislation into practice. And in fact, we know that the action of stripping Polish Jews of citizenship started. It was first in Germany, in Austria in the first place, but we know that in later years also in Switzerland. The correspondence concerning it ends, I think, in in the beginning of September, even when there was there is a letter of Raczyński requesting to not strip one person of the citizenship because like she wouldn't be a problem. She wouldn't came back to Poland. She just don't want to be a stateless person. It was a very bad state to be a stateless person. And of course, then when there was a new anti-Jewish legislation introduced in fascist Italy, it was also, this Polish legislation was also used in Italy. Then I think in March, there was preparation to use this legislation as well in Romania, because this fear of Polish Jews massively re-emigrating to Poland was really great at that time. And what changed in September 1939? I think it's mostly a change of circumstances. I think when we talk about the Jewish question in interwar Poland, it's very strongly connected with a current situation within a country. It's very interesting because we talk about tasks of diplomacy, but in case of a Jewish question, how it was called, it was about Jews that were a part of normally internal affairs. So the Jewish problem was believed to be that there are too many Jews in Poland, that there are most often very poor people and not easily assimilated, not easily acculturated, and that it is very hard to run a very important reforms within a country, within its economic sphere, because of how Jews oppose these reforms. So when we talk about the period after the outbreak of war, it is like Professor Kornat already said, it is a period when Polish government has no land. So this past meaning of Jewish problem, it is not actual. It's no longer, because there is no Polish state. We don't worry about how to make Jewish emigrate from Poland because it's a wartime. It's no longer a valid point to make. With the start of the war, the question that Polish government and Polish National Council discussed within the meaning of the Jewish problem was how to make the situation for Jews in the country once the war ends and the country is independent. So really, it was no way to pursue no longer this understanding of Jewish problem that it was before, and the solution that I think from 1936 we can say that the main solution that the Polish government believed in connection to Jewish question was to pursue mass Jewish immigration from country. When it proved to be almost impossible at the time, because we know how it was with Palestine situation, Great Britain making smaller and smaller entries possible, and then finally white paper in 1939. We can see that no countries were willing to allow Polish citizens, Polish Jews in. So that's why in 1938 this fear of re-immigration became so strong. They couldn't make immigration work as they would like to. So they were focusing on how to stop massive re-immigration to Poland. But when the wartime realities became their main problem, they perceived that without Polish citizenship, those Polish Jews abroad, of course, they wouldn't either way came back to Poland, to Polish occupied territory, but without Polish passport, they wouldn't be able to move anywhere, really. They would be stateless and their situation will be much worse, the worst we can think of. So even during the interwar period, even when they were first making this law applicable in Germany, they were making this distinction that if they know that a certain Polish Jewish citizen that would normally be stripped from the citizenship based on those 3 points they made in this law, if they knew for a fact that this person was going to migrate to another country, not to Poland, that he already has visa to United States, that he has already some way from the Germany, but not into Poland, they wouldn't strip them, they wouldn't strip him from Polish citizenship, because they knew that he wouldn't, it wouldn't make any danger to them. He wouldn't migrate back to Poland. So I think that the decision of Minister Zaleski is very understandable in this context, really, that they knew that the fear of remigration was no longer valid, and they knew that without this Polish citizenship, these Jewish people with some Polish roots living abroad and still having this citizenship would be a very bad state. So they wouldn't make it happen. And it was, as Mr. Ambassador said, it was a decision of Zaleski not to use this law first. And then I think in 1940 or in 1940, I think it was 1941, that President partially abrogated the law from 1948. So we can see that it was changing in this direction. What is also interesting for me to see, it's a strong period, a short period when we can see a continuity from the policy of interwar period. Like the first actions that Raczyński had taken in accordance to Polish Jews, to Foreign Office and Colonial Office in early months of war, it was to enable Polish Jews that had already escaped the Polish occupied territory and were in Romania to enable them an entry to Palestine, a legal entry. He was appealing to them that the situation is extraordinary, and they could allow maybe these Polish Jews who are so close to this Palestine land to come legally, to use some quotas from year 1940, and he didn't succeed in this approach. The Foreign Office didn't allow it even at this point, but we can see this try to use the old policy, yes, to once again make this appeal to Foreign Office on behalf of Polish Jews to make it possible for them to emigrate to Palestine, for which Polish diplomacy was advocating for very intensively for some years before the war. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I think it's muted, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this contribution. You see, a very, different approach from the same state, but on the same at the same time, one particular approach towards Palestine. Jews were always, Poland encouraged the migration to Palestine and de facto encouraged the creation of the Jewish state in Palestine. Dr. Paldiel, it was not planned, but as far as I understand, among those families whose citizenship was restored was your family too, right? Did the Polish passport really help you?
The Polish passport really did help my family. My parents left Poland in the 1920s. My father in the 1920s, my mother in the 1930s, and they met in Belgium, in Antwerp. And as a result, I was born there in Antwerp. I say this with a smile because I once ran into the Polish ambassador in Prague during one of the functions of Yad Vashem. And he said, if your parents had Polish citizenship, and although you were born in Belgium, I can arrange for you also to become a Polish citizen.
You are Polish citizen, probably.
So I never took him up on that because, I didn't think it was, and then I forgot about him. But anyway, so my parents in Belgium were Polish citizens. They carried a Polish passport. When they fled to France, when the Germans invaded, they were on a Polish passport, and they were considered Polish refugees in France. And then when we crossed illegally from France into Switzerland in September 1943. And we were caught by the Swiss guards, and we were registered as Polish citizens. And then I get these letter from, I think from you, Ambassador Kumoch, from Bern, where Stefan Riniewicz, who was the second most important man in the Bern legation, writes to the Swiss police that my family will be under the protection of the Polish legation in Bern, and therefore they should be released from the various detention camps. My mother was with a women detention camp, my father was with the men, and I was with my sister in a children's home in Bélébin, which is the French part of Switzerland. And the response from the police was, the mother and me can be released, but my father not, because he's still able to perform some labor, like cutting wood. So he's going to stay there where he is. So I was not able to thank Stefan Riniewicz, of course, he died, but I still have it in my heart. I know he has a daughter living someplace in the United States. So one day, I hope I can come and say to his daughter, shake her hands and say, thanks for the letter of your father. So, and then we returned, we went back to Belgium, and we renewed our citizenship. And in fact, when we emigrated to the United States in 1950, it was on a Polish passport. And I still have the copies of the passports where my name appears together with my parents on Polish passports.
Well, thank you very much for this beautiful illustration, because this is exactly what Kinga Czechowska used to speak about. There is a big difference between a Jew being a citizen of a country who can at least somehow offer a protection, a stateless Jew who is kind of unprotected during the war. Thank you very much. I can see that we have several questions, and not I is that there is no censorship. Let me read them from the very beginning, from the very first to the very last one. Question to the question. Sorry, once again. A question to Kinga Czechowska. Do you think that part of the idea not to Jews of citizenship or to restore their citizenship was a potential using them as future members of the Polish army? This first question, just more, let me ask 3 questions so that others can prepare themselves to the intervention. The question to Dr. Paldiel: are there any diplomats from the United Kingdom of UK who rescued Jews during the war using fake documents? And well, I can't. Another question also concerns the same question. And another question to Dr. Paldiel, I would make it maybe more broader to all participants. Do we know an example of other diplomats, apart from Ładoś group, who had the support of their government, in this case, the government in exile, in helping Jews? May we say that so far there was a unique case on global scale, meaning these were diplomats who did not disobey their government, who just radically enforced its policy. So maybe I will give the floor to Czechowska to ask the first question. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I understood, if I heard the question correctly, because they were so breaking up while you were reading it. I think it was about the connection between the.
Was
excuse me, it's.
Do you agree that somehow?
Can you maybe repeat
Can you
once
hear me?
again? It's very hard. It's breaking up a lot.
Right.
I didn't hear the start of sentence.
Do you believe that in some cases, the policy of restoring citizenship to Jews was motivated by trying to conscript them to the army?
I haven't heard or read anywhere about this type of connection. I don't think it's very probable, because we can hear about some problems with not wanting to conscript Jews into Polish army, but I'm not sure. I haven't read anything that would support this argument that there is a connection. But I'm not saying there is not. I just don't know about it.
Thank you. I've actually heard about 141 Jews whom Switzerland helped send to Portugal in 1940-41. Probably they were those who volunteered to serve in the Polish armed forces. There were cases like that. So maybe I would split the two other questions to two interlocutors. Dr. Cornell, you spoke about the policy of the United States and the United Kingdom. Have you ever heard about US or UK diplomats forging papers to rescue Jews?
I have to say that I haven't. I have no information on that. Perhaps Dr. Paldiel would know more about that.
Well, I have heard about the American intervention in case of Ładoś passports in 1943 and 44. The United States supported Polish efforts and Vatican efforts and Jewish efforts, first of all, to have these passports recognized by other states. So they contributed to the operation.
On a high diplomatic level. That's interesting.
Yes. I mean, by convincing Latin American states to recognize the passports, of course, they have contributed to the rescue of those who had them. Dr. Paldiel, the question was about the Ładoś group, whether it was unique. I mean, diplomats who did not disobey the government, but kind of like radically enforced its policy. Is it the case, and is there any other case of diplomats like that?
First, I want to say that what is so special and unique and exciting about the what you call the Bernese group or the Ładoś group is that a part of the success of the Ładoś undertaking was because they were working together with other Polish diplomats stationed, for instance, in New York. Dr. Levine, Isaac Levine, had written that the communication came to New York. Polish diplomats in London, the Agudat Israel, wrote letters to the Polish government in London thanking for Ładoś. Polish diplomat in Argentina, and so on. So there were other Polish diplomats who were working together with Ładoś. And so that's one thing that I did not find so much with other diplomats who helped. So if there was a Sugihara, he was the only Japanese that I can come across. If maybe there are others, I don't know. Okay, so that places the Ładoś story in a special position because there were so many diplomats, and that brings me to the thought when I remember reading Emanuel Ringelblum, when he was writing, and he said that the people in Poland, the intelligentsia, as he called them, they were more ready to come to help the Jews, the intelligentsia. So when you talk about the Polish diplomats, they are certainly part of the intelligentsia. They're very educated, all of them, or else they would not have become diplomats. But what I want to remind ourselves and everyone else, what is so special, in my opinion, about the Ładoś story? This is the only case where a group of Polish diplomats are working in tandem, so close, with a group of Jewish major rescuers. I mean, Silberschein, Eis, Sternbuch, Isaac Levine. These are Jews and Polish diplomats working like one big family, helping. I mean, they couldn't do it without each other. They needed each other. I think you brought this up once, Ambassador Kumoch, that this places the story in a special category. You have major Jewish rescuers, like Wilbersheim says, I couldn't do it without the Polish legation, what I tried to do. I just couldn't do it. And then you have Julius Kuhl, which is a Jewish person who was hired by the legation to work in the Polish legation. Julius Kuhl, a religious Jew, an Orthodox Jew, right there in the office. So this is so special, that story, and makes that story so unique. I hope one day maybe a film will be made about this to tell the story, how Jews and Poles work together in this particular case. So I'm not judging, I'm not taking my opinion about what's happening in Poland, but this particular case is such a wonderful
case.
We
are of course talking about particular cases. There's no space and even to discuss the complexity of Polish-Jewish relations. Thank you very much. I have only one question, but I need a panelist who will answer in 1 minute. 1 minute, professor. In 1930, I promised to ask every question. In 1939, a ship with about 900 Jews was sent to the USA, but they had to come back to Europe. Why did the USA not help them? I think it's...
So the answer is that the 937 people on St. Louis, they had been approved for emigration to the United States. They had been approved, but they had to wait their line, which was going to take 2 more years. And so they decided after Kristallnacht, we don't want to wait in Germany for 2 years until our number comes up. Maybe we can go to Cuba and live there as tourists for 2 years. And then our number will come up. And from Cuba, we will travel to Florida, to the United States. That's the reason why they wanted to go to Cuba. There is a joke which was then very common then. The joke is like this. A Jewish person comes into the American embassy and the American embassy says, you have been approved for emigration to the United States, but your number is way down the list and it's going to take maybe 10 years until your number comes up. So congratulations, but you have to come back in 10 years and then you'll get the visa. And the Jew is about to leave. And he said, excuse me, I have one more question. Yes, what's your question? When I come back in 10 years in this office, should I come in the morning or in the afternoon? That's the joke that went around in those days. So the St. Louis people had been approved for immigration, but they had to wait 2 years and they didn't want to pay it in Germany.
Exactly so.
Well, yeah. I mean, this joke, unfortunately, was not a joke at the time. Most of the passengers did not survive the Holocaust, as far as I understand, and this was a sad story. Well, thank you very much to sum up for taking part in this panel. I hope we have answered most of the questions, describing more or less the attitude of various countries, allied countries, towards the persecution of Jews and Holocaust. This showing how much individual diplomatic rescuers differ from the government, or how much their attitudes differed, placing Poland in this world map of the Second World War. Polish diplomats, which represented the state not controlling its own territory. And finally, thank you very, very much. A difference between the pre-war, what was pre-war Poland and what was wartime Poland. 2 different governments. Pre-war opposition formed government during the war. So their Jewish agenda was also different from the previous government. There was a change of regime in Poland in 1939. Big applause to all of you. Thank you very much for all what you have done.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.